Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. Africa is home to a mixed collection of promising nations and failed states where the presence of foreign soldiers and sound of gunshots, the fear of bomb attacks and the likelihood of airstrikes bears all the trademarks of instability inspired by insurgency. Ravaged by civil war and unrest since 1991, Somalia is dealing with the aftershock of a bomb explosion in the heart of the capital Mogadishu, the deadliest single attack in the history of the Horn of African nation. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the latest terror attack in Somalia that has claimed more than 250 lives and left many more injured? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
At least more than 200 people were killed and 275 others injured in a deadly bomb explosion near a popular hotel in the Somali capital Mogadishu on Saturday. A vehicle loaded with explosives exploded at Kilometer 5 in downtown Mogadishu, killing many civilians, including government staff members, diplomatic personnel and journalists. Authorities say the death toll could still rise as recovery efforts continue. A nationwide blood donation campaign is currently ongoing in Somalia in some of the country's biggest hospitals. The president was among the first to join in the blood campaign.
This was a tragic incident, and it is a sign that Al-Shabaab continues to target innocent civilians. The Somali public need to know now, more than ever, of the group's evil plans. Today, it has once again attacked civilians in a populated area.
Somalia, a country in the Horn of Africa, has been suffering from political turbulence for years, and the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab, recently ranked as the deadliest militant group in Africa, has carried out similar attacks in the past in Somalia and its neighboring countries.
Today we have lost valuable people among the society. Let us all join in the fight against the terrorist group that is threatening our peace and stability. Let's forget about our differences and work for the betterment of our society.
Security has been beefed up all across Mogadishu after the blast, and President Farmajo has declared 3 days of mourning for the victims and called on all Somali people to unite and fight against terrorism. Although no organization or individual has claimed responsibility for the recent blast, the Somali government has blamed the Al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab, which has staged similar attacks in the past. The blast is considered the deadliest single attack in recent years in the country.
Amidst the chaos that trailed the attack, stories began to emerge of how a female medical student was killed on the eve of her graduation, and also how the explosion hit a couple returning from hospital after having their first child. Now, more than 100 victims have been buried and about 160 people said to be burned beyond recognition as the death toll is expected to rise. Joining me in the studio on Africa Today, I have Cyril Abaku, journalist and researcher in Lagos, Nigeria. And on Skype, I have Dr. Martin Ewi, senior researcher, counter-terrorism at the Institute of Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. Good to have you gentlemen on the program. Now, let me begin with you, Cyril. Now, various world leaders right now have reacted to the Mogadishu bomb attacks. Even in France, an Eiffel Tower was turned off. The electric power was turned off in solidarity with the victims of the attack. And in Turkey, the government has sent medical supplies and flew some of the victims, to Ankara for treatment. But this is quite a difficult time in Somalia, wouldn't you agree?
It's a very difficult time, and sadly, I think this is perhaps the beginning of something more sinister. I am sorry that things have come to that pass, but you see, I think that what Al-Shabaab, perhaps as the government has alleged, being behind the attacks, what we're seeing now are no longer terrorist attacks. I think they are political attacks.
How do you mean?
Because if you, Al-Shabaab in the past 10 or so years that it began its insurgency, has been taking bashing from several quarters, including, if you remember, the US that has consistently, bombed their strongholds. But how they got access to this sort of sophisticated military-grade weapons, and the fact that they were targeting the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Mogadishu apparently seems to point to the fact that they had a clear message and they had an intention. If you look at what has been happening in Somalia this year alone, the Gulf nations are playing a very terrible boxing match, using Somalia as the boxing ring. So Turkey, that only some days ago established a military base in Somalia, is now going to be distracted from its agenda, in expanding military and trade ties into Africa, into beginning to grapple with this humanitarian issue. I think that the Somali government, being that they are trying to reconstruct the nation from years of famine, I mean, famine is still going on very strong. They are trying to build. This is not when we should be having an attack of this kind. Even Al-Shabaab, they've not, I mean, in recent memory, this is about the deadliest, the biggest, the casualty rate, the sort of explosion that took place. Even when the police managed to find out that an attack of this kind was on the way, they were just inches away from the explosion. So it's terrible. We mourn with them. I am sad that I know African countries have not even come out to do as much as what France and other international nations have done. Doing. I expected this is an this is
Well, the African Union has also extended a hand.
Well, but this is a continental disaster, and one would have expected more. I mean, France, even if they had not issued the statement, having the Eiffel Tower go in the color in the yes,
in solidarity,
is a big statement. But away from that, I think that we need to understand what is really going on in Somalia. If for some reason its diplomacy is offensive to anybody, I think they can always sit down and have negotiations. But what is going on right now in Somalia is not a terrorist attack, and it's a political attack.
All right, Dr. Martin Elway, I believe you just heard Cyril's point of view. Do you go with his sentiments?
Well, I think that this is really a horrible day in Somalia. Well, the whole weekend, actually, since the attacks occurred on Saturday. But what this demonstrates is that whoever carried out the attacks has acquired new strength. And indeed, I do think that, it goes a long way to demonstrate the security loopholes in Somalia. This is coming at the time when, the United States government has stepped up attacks on Al-Shabaab, has stepped up attacks on other terrorist groups in the country, and of course the African Union has been working there. So an attack of this nature really sabotages everything that we believe in terms of what counter-terrorism can achieve. Because again, what Al-Shabaab or whoever has carried out these attacks is demonstrating that the forces that be cannot really stop its progress.
So you do not believe that this is clearly a political attack, so to speak, as pointed out by Cyril Abaku?
Well, I mean, we don't have the proof to that extent. This is not the first such attack. We've had attack in the past in which 230 people died. But in any measure, this is the biggest attack, and that's why I said it really demonstrates that whoever carried out the attacks has acquired new weaponry, new strength, new power, to be able to do this. I wouldn't also want to jump to conclude that this was Al-Shabaab, even though the footprints and the hallmarks of the attacks really point to that direction. But indeed, we've been watching what is happening in the Gulf. The accusation against Qatar and counter-accusation against Saudi Arabia and even to some extent Egypt, that these countries are sponsoring terrorism in the region, and that Somalia has become a pawn or the theater for them to demonstrate their strength. Again, for one to believe in this, then we'll neglect the whole history of this whole insurgency in Somalia, which, since the formation of Al-Shabaab in 2006, has really been increasing. If you look at even in the past 5 years, when we talk of Boko Haram, the next group that comes in line is Al-Shabaab, which means that the group has all along been a very deadly group, but we've never seen anything of this sort in Somalia.
All right, let me hold your thought for now, Dr. Martin Erwi. We need to go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the latest terror attacks in Somalia that has claimed more than 250 lives and many more left injured. Welcome back. The Mogadishu bombing has been tagged one of the deadliest attacks in Africa, larger than the Garissa University attack in Kenya in 2015 and the U.S. Embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. So far, only Turkey has responded to a government request for international help, and some Somalia's hospitals can't treat patients with complicated injuries. Now, Cyril, if we look at the counter-terrorism operations in Somalia, one will begin to ask questions. Perhaps these operations that is being going on, one way or the other, triggered what we see today in Somalia. Do you think, or do you agree with that notion?
Well, it's counter-terrorism, which means the terrorism that you're trying to counter.
Yeah.
And in that case, if the terrorists have their means, they will fight back. But if you look at it like a jigsaw, you can virtually put the pieces together, even if you don't want to come to an absolute conclusion. Okay, so you find that a group that has been severely degraded, a group that has been, you have the AMISOM command there, you have the US that has been on the offensive, for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Usually, when you have a group like this suddenly being armed overnight, it's not, for me, I think it's even beyond terrorism. It means that there's a renewed agenda that is inspiring and arming its emergence, and which is why, if you look at the way the attack happened, and even looking at the response, Somalia, the Somalian government on its own does not even have the wherewithal to shoulder much of its responsibilities. It has relied on international aid, on assistance from several countries. There was time the UAE was even saying that we are going to pay their national army and so on. So this is a country that was brought to its knees. There's famine. There's you just name it. I mean, when you talk about a failed state, Somalia gives us that picture. But this year, with elections being held and everything, there was hope that somehow they were going to. And I think that countries that have been one way or the other part and parcel of the process are not shouldn't leave Somalia, entirely to itself. It's a good thing that Turkey has come to its rescue. I know that Qatar too, although at the time the Gulf Cooperation Council had issues with Qatar, there was this request whether unspoken or unofficial, that Somalia needed also to break ties with Qatar. But that doesn't really come to pass. So somehow that discontent has been there. But we will appeal. I think that somehow the interplay of diplomatic forces using Qatar as a theater of action ought to reduce. And then Somalia needs to be given a chance to grow on its own. I personally find it questionable, okay, that anybody anywhere, for whatever reason, will either allow or sit back and perhaps even be happy that an attack of this kind could come through. Because if you look at, I mean, the weapons that were used in this particular attack could only have come from political authority. And we are not talking about some roadside, we are talking about actual, so something somewhere is wrong. We may not be able to name it, you know, on the surface, but I believe that those who know conventionally, when Al-Shabaab carries out this sort of attack, you know, huge attacks, they don't come out to say that they carried that they are responsible because of public image and all of that. But it's clear, and the government has come out to directly accuse them. They have not said that they did not carry the attack. But one way or the other, we need to find out who is funding these people and what is their ultimate end game. Because in the end, we need a country that is stabilized, that is brought up to a particular extent, at least in its bid to be reconstructed, and then that can stand on its feet. As it stands now, the Somali government is, like Dr. Matthew said, is being made to be a mere pawn. And those people who are using, you know, who have the leverage to be pushing her from north to south or east to west, I think ought to back down a bit and give Somalia some room to breathe. All
right, Dr. Martin Elway, now Cyril just mentioned about something about finding those funding the terrorist elements. What, in your own perspective, what can be done to, you know, tackle this unseemingly ending situation in Somalia?
Well, you know, the Somali society, you know, which we know since 1991, I think as Cyril has rightly said, has been a failed state, which means that, you know, some states in the region, I'm saying including the Middle East, I think he's mentioned some of the countries, including Qatar and, you know, Saudi Arabia. One goes straight to the United Arab Emirates and other countries, which, you know, for some reason have been fighting one another because of other political issues. I won't, because I've known Al-Shabaab for quite some time now. I wouldn't want to rush to say that these countries, you know, are directly funding Al-Shabaab. But I think Al-Shabaab is certainly benefiting from some of this political conflict or geopolitical conflict in the region. I also think that the key issue with the terrorism in Somalia, it's an international conspiracy. I'm not one that believes in conspiracy, but if you look at what is happening, when the international community got serious with piracy, they almost eliminated it. They brought it almost to zero. Why is it that we cannot take the same kind of resolute response against Al-Shabaab?
So why do you think it is an international conspiracy? Even though you're getting there, first of all, what kind of international conspiracy are you looking at? What is the aim?
The fact that if you look at the response to Al-Shabaab, it has been half-hearted, lip service, I will say. It's true the U.S. will want every now and then come with drones and bomb a few targets here and there, but there is no clear strategy, you know, in terms of that they really want to eliminate Al-Shabaab from the face of Somalia. Everything has just been ad hoc, and, you know, once a time service that, you know, they do and so on. The African Union has not been able to put up a solid plan on how to defeat Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Today we can be talking of funding. Al-Shabaab controls territories in Somalia, and therefore they use these territories to raise funding. So even without international funding, they're still well off to, you know, to carry out serious harm against Somalia. And therefore I think that, you know, and why I accuse the international community of conspiracy is that we've not been able to carry out the kind of sweeping response. You know, when piracy affected international trade, that most countries across Europe, Asia, and Africa were suffering from piracy in Somalia. The response was completely different. Why is it that, you know, the international community is unable to respond to Al-Shabaab as they responded to piracy? Al-Shabaab, most of southeastern Somalia is controlled by Al-Shabaab. And then we've somehow folded our arms to say, okay, if you stay there, that's fine. But we forget that once you give a terrorist group territory from which they can plan, they can raise funding, they can organize, and then they can strike anywhere. You know, and that's what we've given to Al-Shabaab. I'm forgetting that just upstream is Yemen.
So what is the best way to handle the situation now? Because we're talking about lives being lost almost, you know, on a regular basis here. We're talking about 300 persons died out of a bomb blast due to terrorist plans. How can we put a stop to this?
That's exactly what I'm saying, that the whole international community needs to stand up. This should be a wake-up call for the international community to say enough is enough. We are now going in to eliminate Al-Shabaab from Somalia. You know, they've really abandoned to even sponsor the community initiatives that have been taking place in Somalia to really bring people to dissuade, you know, people from joining Al-Shabaab, from supporting the group, and to also, you know, appeal to Al-Shabaab militants to surrender. They've made some successes to some extent, but the lack of full support, the lack of resources, initiatives, you know, to further make progress on this stand has really caused Al-Shabaab to every now and then withdraw from the process, and then once they withdraw, they carry out this kind of attacks. So I think that the international community should make up its mind, say enough is enough, we want to bring Somalia back to its feet, and therefore I think they can do it. Somalia is a very small country. You know, if the international community were to invest really in the Somali process, I think that Al-Shabaab can be eliminated within the next 5 years. Indeed,
with that positive note, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Martin Ewe, for that analysis right there on the program. Well, let me quickly wrap up the show with you now, Cyril. With what he said, he believes Somalia can defeat Al-Shabaab. Somalia can have a promise, you know, a life of its own, even though it's being threatened every now and then by, you know, terrorist elements and all. But if you're to look at it forward, this government that's under President Mohammed, just under 8 months, you know, in government, in power, and it is affected or is saddled with this responsibility of insecurity challenge. How do you think the government can rise up to the occasion now, even though, as in May, earlier this year in May, in London, the president had called for an upliftment of a 25-year-old arms embargo on the country. Now, with all this at play, how do you think the government can really, you know, surmount these challenges?
Well, I think that the Somali political class needs to, we say this all the time, but it has to happen and needs to come to a consensus. The fact that this year alone, 2 regions in Somalia broke away, you know, as it were, and claiming that they were not in tune with Mogadishu's diplomatic position, denouncing Mogadishu's diplomatic allies, and pledging allegiance to whom they deemed fit, you know, to some other country, tells you that there is a major rift. And as I've said before, diplomacy is perhaps one of the biggest issues influencing what is going on. So that is one. The political class needs to come together, one. And then, secondly, I think that, you know, the way the attack came, I mean, it was really close, perhaps very close to the target it was really going after. So it means that perhaps the security apparatus in Mogadishu also needs to be do some soul searching, because there might have been a few loopholes here and there. Some kind of insider, you know, activity that might have let the enemy come so close. Yeah, so I think they need to do that. And in doing that, the U.S. that has, I don't know for one how much of intelligence sharing goes on between Washington and Mogadishu, but if they need to step that up, they need to step it up so that attacks can be prevented. And then, as I said, let's realize that Somalia is in a class by itself, and that whatever the interests are, international interests are in Somalia, or whatever international interests are that has turned Somalia into a theater of the boxing matches. They should give Somalia a special status. They should say whatever we are doing let's keep Somalia out of it. Let's give them some time to grow. Let's allow them to, you know, because without doing that, it's sad what is going on. And as I said in my opening, if the Somali government indeed is not helped, and an attack like this has happened, I don't know how much more it is going to be able to prevent further attacks from happening. These things have been happening. The scale at which it happened now, we do not know. We do not know what may be coming behind. So I think it is important, like I said, the security, whatever should be reviewed. And then, in addition to that, we need to understand that politically and diplomatically and economically, they should come together to say, we need to give Somalia a chance. Let it just be on its own. Let's isolate them for development. Let them just grow. Let's give them another 5-6 years. I believe that if such a consensus is reached, both internally and externally, Al-Shabaab may not have who to run to, you know, for aid and for funding, and then we can see. But without these such practical steps being taken, I fear that.
Let's have hope.
Yes, let's have hope.
That there will be something good come out from Somalia in the end. Thank you very much, Cyril Abako, researcher, for your analysis on the program. It's a pleasure.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Terrorism in all its form continues to constitute one of the most serious threats to international peace, regional security and human existence, especially in parts of Africa where the idea of witnessing the next day is almost uncertain for residents. At this point, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Somalia as we call for more global support to rebuild hope and unity in the face of growing insecurity. And that is our package for today. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Mokwariola, and always remember, change starts with you.